June 28, 1914. A sunny morning in Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, rode through the streets in an open car. A wrong turn brought him face to face with a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip. Two shots rang out. The Archduke and his wife were dead. Within 6 weeks, the entire continent of Europe would be at war. This is the story of the Great War, a conflict so devastating that people called it the war to end all wars. They were tragically wrong. WWI 1914. Europe was a powder keg waiting to explode. Decades of rising nationalism, imperial rivalries, and military buildups had created a dangerous web of alliances. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. France, Russia, and Britain countered with the Triple Entente. Each nation believed that strong militaries and powerful alliances would keep the peace. Instead, they guaranteed that any conflict would engulf the entire continent. The Balkans were especially volatile. Austria-Hungary had annexed Bosnia in 1908, enraging Serbian nationalists. When Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, Austria-Hungary saw its chance to crush Serbian aspirations. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The alliance system activated like dominoes. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. German forces invaded neutral Belgium. Britain declared war on Germany. Within days, most of Europe was at war. Everyone expected it to be over by Christmas. They couldn't have been more wrong. The German war plan called for a rapid knockout blow against France. German forces swept through Belgium and into northern France, pushing toward Paris. The French and British armies retreated, but regrouped. At the Marne River in September 1914, they stopped the German advance just miles from Paris. Unable to outflank each other, both sides began digging trenches. The trenches stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border, a 400-mile scar across Europe. What was supposed to be a war of movement became a static nightmare of mud, barbed wire, and machine guns. The Western Front was born, and it would barely move for the next 4 years. Life in the trenches was hell on earth. Soldiers lived in narrow ditches, surrounded by mud, rats, and the bodies of the dead. Artillery bombardments could last for days, driving men mad with constant noise. Disease was rampant. When soldiers weren't being shelled, they faced the terror of going over the top, climbing out of the trenches and charging across no man's land toward enemy positions. Machine guns and artillery made these attacks suicidal. Men advanced into storms of steel, cut down in waves before they could reach enemy trenches. A few hundred yards of muddy ground could cost tens of thousands of lives. Yet commanders on both sides kept ordering the same futile attacks, believing that enough men and shells would eventually break through. The year 1916 brought two of history's bloodiest battles. At Verdun, the Germans launched a massive offensive designed to bleed France white. For 10 months, the battle raged. The French held under the rallying cry, "They shall not pass." When it ended, 700,000 men were dead or wounded, and the lines had barely moved. That summer, the British launched the Battle of the Somme. On July 1, 1916, British troops climbed out of their trenches and walked toward German positions. German machine guns mowed them down. 20,000 British soldiers died on the first day, the bloodiest day in British military history. The battle dragged on for months. By November, over 1 million men were casualties. The British had advanced just 6 miles. While the Western Front stagnated, war raged across the globe. On the Eastern Front, massive armies clashed across the vast plains of Eastern Europe. Russia won early victories against Austria-Hungary, but suffered catastrophic defeats against Germany. Millions of Russian soldiers died, often poorly equipped and poorly led in the Middle East. British forces fought the Ottoman Empire. At sea, the British Royal Navy blockaded Germany, slowly strangling its economy. Germany responded with submarine warfare, sinking merchant ships. The war even took to the skies. For the first time, aircraft became weapons of war. Fighter pilots engaged in dramatic dogfights over the trenches. By 1917, the war had ground all sides down. France suffered mutinies as exhausted soldiers refused more suicidal attacks. Britain was running out of men. Germany was starving under the British blockade. But two events would change everything. In Russia, the strain of war proved too much. Food shortages, military defeats, and war weariness sparked revolution in March 1917. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. In November, the Bolsheviks under Vladimir Lenin seized control and began negotiating peace with Germany. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918 took Russia out of the war. Meanwhile, the United States was moving toward war. Initially neutral, America had been drawn closer to the Allies. German submarine warfare, particularly the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which killed 128 Americans, had outraged American opinion. In early 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Fresh American troops began arriving in France, providing exactly what the Allies needed: new soldiers, new equipment, and new hope. Germany knew it had to win before American power could tip the balance. In spring 1918, Germany launched massive offensives on the Western Front. Initial gains were impressive, but the German army was exhausted, hungry, and running out of supplies. They couldn't sustain the advance by summer. The tide had turned. Allied forces, reinforced by hundreds of thousands of American troops, counterattacked. Using new tactics combining infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft, they pushed the Germans back. For the first time since 1914, the Western Front was moving, and the Germans were retreating. Germany's allies began to collapse. Bulgaria surrendered in September. The Ottoman Empire in October. Austria-Hungary in November. In Germany, the naval fleet mutinied. Workers and soldiers formed revolutionary councils. The Kaiser abdicated and fled. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the armistice took effect. The guns fell silent. The cost was almost incomprehensible. More than 20 million people were dead, soldiers and civilians. Another 21 million were wounded. Entire generations of young men had been wiped out. France lost 1.4 million soldiers. Britain lost nearly 1 million. Germany lost 2 million. Russia lost over 3 million. Villages across Europe lost all their young men. The landscape of northern France and Belgium was utterly destroyed. In 1919, world leaders gathered at Versailles to forge a peace treaty. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires ceased to exist. New nations emerged: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. The League of Nations was founded to prevent future wars, but the Treaty of Versailles was also a treaty of revenge. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, lose significant territory, disarm almost completely, and pay massive reparations. Many Germans felt humiliated and betrayed. These resentments would fester, creating the conditions for an even more terrible conflict just 2 decades later. World War I destroyed 4 empires and shattered the old European order. It introduced horrors that would haunt the 20th century: poison gas, aerial bombing of civilians, industrial-scale killing. It traumatized a generation and left scars that never healed. The optimism of the pre-war world vanished, replaced by disillusionment. Yet it also accelerated social change. Women had taken on jobs previously reserved for men, advancing the cause of women's suffrage. Colonial subjects who fought for their European masters began demanding independence. The war proved that modern industrial nations could mobilize resources on an unprecedented scale. The men who survived called themselves the Lost Generation. They had been promised glory and adventure. They found only mud, blood, and death. Poets like Wilfred Owen wrote of the horror and futility. The war produced no heroes, only survivors. And the peace they won was merely a ceasefire, a brief pause before the world would tear itself apart once more. World War I was the first modern war, and it revealed the terrible truth of the modern age: that technology had given humanity the power to destroy itself on a scale never before imagined. The Great War changed everything, and the world would never be the same again.